Welcome to Super Meat World! Into this update, we're gonna play the one Captain Viridian chapter that stands out from the rest. But unfortunately we cannot find it in the recommended chapters list. In fact, it's the first time in quite some time that it failed us, but here we go, we're gonna play Vexing Vortex. This chapter was made by RyokoTK, and if I remember well, it's the before last chapter that he's made. The last one being Minneapolis, but we'll come back to this other beast later because this is one chapter that I'm gonna dread playing. But let's stick to this one, shall we? I'm pretty sure that there's been several chapters that focus on Captain Viridian and the style of gameplay that you found in VVVVV, or whatever name you want to give to that game, but yeah, this is by far the most competent chapter of the bunch. As you might expect from Ryoko, the levels all look really good, the gameplay for the most part is really well done, it's fluid enough and it's pretty easy to grasp for the most part, but yeah, this is the one weakness that is into this one chapter, and in fact almost every single chapter that I'll play from now on in Super Meat World. For most people, this chapter will be way too hard. I mean, for starters, it's pretty hard to adapt gameplay to Super Meat Boy because both games have a totally different physics and platforming engine, and well, everything here is a whole lot more floaty and a little bit less immediate than it was into the original game, so the entire thing changes the perspective entirely. But the biggest change between that and VVVVVV is that, unlike the original game, you can jump here. So this adds a whole lot more possibilities to the gameplay, but it also has a whole lot more complications. This makes it so that sometimes the level design can be a little bit less immediate because there are times where you'll have to interrogate yourself on whether you have to jump or flip the gravity in order to do certain parts. But for the most part, this is a chapter that has well-designed difficulty. Okay, maybe not here because this is kind of a dick move because you have absolutely no idea that you're gonna die the moment that you flip up here. And this is the kind of stunts that you'll see where the gameplay is not as fluid as it could be into the original game. Yeah, I'm just gonna say this because saying all of the time is just gonna make this one hell of a mouth twister. Yeah, sometimes the levels may look easy, but well, it's another story whenever you're playing them. Unfortunately, this one part of the level is rather tedious because you have to ascend or descend your way upside down really slowly so that you don't bang yourself against the saw blades, but I have to admit that it's a pretty clever approach to the level here. But while I said that this chapter is incredibly hard for the most part, in most cases the difficulty is well designed here because even though the levels are pretty hard, they're not the kind of difficulty that will make you want to toss your controller and make you walk away. For the most part, these are levels that you'll want to see until the end because the difficulty is engaging enough and the things don't look blatantly unfair and you simply won't want to throw your controller in spite. For the most part, the obstacles that you have to deal with here are saw blades, spikes, and sometimes saw blade shooters. So usually there's no reflexes that are needed in order to beat this chapter. Usually it's all about precision and doing careful jumps or flips. I really like the way that this chapter looks in overall. Even though the backgrounds from one level to the other usually are of a totally different color, all of the hazards are clearly defined because they're always at the default color, so they clearly stand out from the rest, and therefore you won't wonder what killed you every once in a while. Oh my god, I didn't expect to land onto this one platform and therefore I died. While the chapter gets really difficult as you progress more and more through it, the first few levels are not too difficult, but you'll still want to watch out for those levels because they can still take you down by surprise. I remember the first time that I played this chapter, I was wholly unprepared for it and I pretty much suffered through it in the worst way imaginable. You really need to spend a whole lot of levels in order to get used to the way that Captain Viridian controls, because his handling really isn't the best around. I mean, Captain Viridian is pretty slow, he probably has the crappiest jump of the entire game, and these are all variants that you're gonna have to deal with for this entire run. For the most part, my favorite levels into this one chapter are the ones which simply make you flip up and down and pretty much make it so that there's absolutely nothing complicated. But yeah, the first time that you play this level, you kinda have to guess that you have to flip up and not move at all in order to beat the level. I'll grant it, you can see the platform there on your way forward through the level, but chances are that you may not remember it if you're like me and you have the memory of a goldfish. The hardest thing to adapt to when you're playing this chapter, or well, any level that involves Captain Viridian, is the fact that unlike the original game, whenever you flip, it's not done instantly at a fixed speed. Your falling and rising upwards is at a gradual speed, so you always start out slower and get faster the more you advance, but this can throw you off a bit, especially if you've played the original game before. This is another one of the levels in the chapter that I really like. Levels that are really simple and yet can be a whole lot more complicated than they could be. I mean, this is one level that probably will be a whole lot easier if I simply stick with flipping the gravity, but instead I'm just like, oh, I need to jump in order to beat this level. Oh my god. Dying at the last second always is a hoot. And of course, the one time that jumping would have been useful and I failed to do it. So yeah, this is one level that I really ended up having a lot of trouble beating. But hey, for the most part, it's fine, because here it's because of my incompetence at the level, and not because the level is unfair or anything. And hooray for random lights in the middle of nowhere. A staple whenever you are uploading levels on the portal, because half of the time, whenever you will click on buttons on the interface of the level editor, you will randomly add stuff onto the level, and therefore this is why whenever you will open levels and you will be, why is there a block in the middle of nowhere or a light? Well, that's the reason, because the editor is really badly made for the most part. Yeah, is this another light that was added by accident? Because yeah, it really doesn't look as if it fits really well here. While I'm currently talking about the level editor, I might as well continue talking a little bit more about it, just in order to clarify what is probably the biggest failing of all of the Super Meat Boy level editing community, which is the level editor itself. To me, the biggest reason why the level editing scene for this game crash and burn is because of the way that the level editor was handled. The level designing community for Super Meat Boy was at its peak back when the level editor was found out by accident by some random people who just typed in I'm not really sure where I'm going onto this one level. But yeah, some people accidentally found out about dev mode and they just figured out that there was a level editor ripe for the taking and the learning. Into its first form, the level designer was really unintuitive and really hard to use, but it was still functional, and for a whole lot of people, and myself included, it still happened to be the best version of the level editor out there. Bizarrely enough, the later versions of the level editor were vastly inferior to dev mode in almost every possible way. In fact, the first official version of the level editor was simply unusable. There were so many glitches on it that it was not worth using up at all. For instance, if you finished the level into dev mode and you didn't press the F1 key really fast, all that it will do is you will be stuck into the level itself and you will not be able to go back to editing it. All in all, the kind of things that can easily make you waste a full hour or 30 minutes of work in a jiffy. Also, there were a lot of other problems, like waypoints not working at all. And for the sake of clarification, waypoints are the things that you use in order to make saw blades move around moving platforms, keys, all of these sort of things. I just remember so many things that were done into this one level editor that simply would not work anymore, and basically, well, you had buttons instead, how about that? So in short, the first version of the level editor was a huge mess, and it remained that way for almost an entire month. Sure, a usable version of the level editor had been put out, but at this point the damage was all done, and most of the level designing community pretty much scampered away just because it took a whole lot of time in order to finally be able to get things working. And it also didn't help that the level portal's launch was delayed by about 3 months. Yeah, it was supposed to launch in January 2011, but it was launched in April instead. And looking at the way it launched, Well, what the hell were they doing for all of this time, considering how barely functioning it was out of the gate? I mean, people probably would have minded as much if it came out in January, because people would have thought, okay, it was rushed, so we can excuse all of the glitches, but no, with all of the delay and additional work, everything still didn't work. But yeah, the first version of the level editor was a catastrophe. The second one at least worked, but there were a couple of features that were into dev mode, but for some reason were not found anymore until the new version. For instance, whenever you will copy particles, I mean the stuff that you will use in order to make like saw blade glitter and all sort of things like that, I mean, it also will be used as rain into the Rapture. Well, usually whenever you do effects like this, you will copy a particle effect and you will copy and paste it over and over again and simply change the properties really quickly, but into the new version of the level editor, you could not do that anymore. You had to manually type in all of the properties of particle effects one by one, and that thing took forever to do. It's just a kind of small detail that will piss you off, given the fact that in dev mode it was a whole lot easier to achieve. Ironically enough, the non-user-friendly version of the level editor was the one that was the most usable out there. And that should do it for the level editor. Let's go back to Vexing Vortex already. The second half of the chapter is where the difficulty starts getting incredibly high. The jumps usually are pretty narrow, you need some really good timings in some level, especially the last one that I've just played. It might not have seemed like a hard level at first glance, but after playing it, you'll see that it requires a lot more timing than you'd think. This is the point of the chapter where you really have to start thinking about every single jump that you do. This is not a speedrunning chapter here, you're not into a hurry, instead, it's pretty much just an anti-hurry chapter. In fact, I'm not sure that I've managed to get the par time for at least a quarter of these levels. I'm usually way behind the time that you need to get. But then again, you do not have to get those times. That's the beauty of Super Meat World, because it doesn't save any kind of time whatsoever. Oh yeah, and that's another thing which pissed off people about Super Meat World. Time's not saving, because you probably all know already that this game has a whole lot of speedrunning credit or whatever. But by removing the ability to have any kind of meaningful speedrun competitions about these levels, well, you remove an entire part of the appeal of the custom levels to begin with. And since times aren't saving, usually the last thing that will make it so that you'd want to play custom levels is, well, to make it through incredibly hard stages that have absolutely no possible way of finishing most of them. Ergo, instead of making levels that will be more speedrun friendly and all of this, the fact that times will not save instead encourage everybody to simply make their levels as hard as they can. But hey, you have to deal with the cards that you've been offered. Weirdly enough, early on into the chapter, there were parts where you had to flip gravity and you would simply spin into a completely void hallway where there was absolutely no way of predicting what kind of obstacle you'd see, and therefore you will die on a saw blade. But later on into the chapter, you don't see that happen anymore, so thankfully the design is getting more and more tight. This level probably would have been one of the levels that I would have put last into the chapter. It probably would have been hard enough to be a proper final challenge, because holy shit, this level is hard. You can already see that this is a two-way level. You cannot afford to flip onto the breakable blocks out there and destroy the entire walkway while you're making it across in order to get the key and going back, because you need to keep enough floor in order for you to make it back to the other side. And it's much easier said than done, considering all of the saw blade launchers that are around the area, both horizontally and vertically. And with that said, stay tuned for the Dark World version of this map, where all of the levels are built around breakable blocks. Oh god, I really wouldn't want to see a Dark World version of this one chapter or level. Speaking of which, however, you barely see any of those available, at least not in recognizable chapters or high-profile levels that, for the most part, everyone should play. There's only one exception to this rule as far as I remember, and we'll see it later. And let's hear it for dying on the final saw blade of the entire level! This is so enjoyable on a level like this. I really love it a lot. You do not necessarily need to jump up there in order to flip all the way up there, but you might as well make things easier for yourself, especially if you're into dying right after anyway. Those flipping sections already are hard enough as they are, so don't make matters even more complicated than they need to be. While I'm struggling to hell with this one level, we might as well just enjoy the soundtrack of this game. Or, well, the soundtrack of VVVVVV. Or not! Whenever you're talking about failures, you always succeed. That's the rule of everything. So yeah, if that wasn't the last level of the chapter, I just cannot imagine what the rest of this chapter will look like. Will it get harder? Well, there's only one way to find out. And after playing this level, the answer is a resonant yes. This is one especially brutal level. You see the small innocent breakable block hovering into midair? Yeah, you need to use it in order to make yourself flip all the way back up like that, and it's possible to kill yourself while making yourself flip back into the correct position, because you will simply jump on the block before it fades away, and therefore you will plummet to your doom. And this section of the level is pretty much where all of the level's difficulty is. It doesn't look all that hard, but believe me, it is. Yeah, you need to jump over this one saw blade, then after that you must flip on those two platforms, and of course that one saw blade launcher is configured so that you barely have enough time to do everything. And yeah, that was what I was talking about when I was talking about the crumbling block killing you. You cannot afford to hurry into this one chapter. Not at all. Honestly, this section of the level pretty much is the entire chapter in a nutshell. Only though here, it requires a lot more precision and you barely have any room for error here. And then, as a complete contrast, the rest of this level is so easy. But I still really like the end of this level. I just enjoy the way that those saw blades are really large and ominous looking, and yet the obstacle itself really is easy to overcome whenever you think really well about it. So yeah, so far the final stretch of the chapter is really good. Oh, okay, I stand corrected. This level is by far the worst level of the entire chapter. As Captain Viridian, you are ill-equipped for this level. First of all, you're shot by off-screen rockets, your character is really slow, the rocket launchers shoot faster than they usually do. So in a nutshell, you completely have no clue what the fuck you're doing. I mean, what the hell is even happening? Just look at how many rockets are circling all over the place. And I have no clue how the hell it only took me 2 tries to beat this one level. Call it divine luck. I mean, if you want to see my first attempt at this one level, go look up my whole Super Meat World video, part 6. After the last few levels, unfortunately, this one level is kinda underwhelming. In fact, my biggest enemy into this one level is my inability to find out what you have to do in order to beat this one level. You have to get onto this one platform to the left and just flip, and then finally you jump all the way up here in order to finally make the final jumps that you have to do in order to reach the end. But no, I decide I have to jump for this wall immediately, and I will not stand for any kind of failure, even though that they're not logical at all. Here we go, now this is what you have to do. Okay, you have to do that until you die to the saw blade, but okay, we're gonna get to the proper solution of this in due time, I swear. All in all, I'm really not sure why this one level was not earlier into the chapter. It's really not as hard as the other levels that we've went through lately, and finally, it's a whole lot more simpler. How about putting that one level with the one long saw blade tunnel where you had to flip really fast in order to make this the before last level? This one level is a fitting end to the chapter. It's pretty hard, but not too much, and finally I really like how come the entire end of the level is shaped into this one giant square. It just feels like something that was taken straight from the original game. I really like that you're circling around the goal of the level here. This is mainly why I really find the level to be pretty appealing and fun to play. And obviously you have to do this into this direction because you cannot jump below at the right, as you might have seen earlier, because Captain Viridian is too much of a poor jumper to make it all the way there. So once again, this level is pretty much all about timing. Once again, this is pretty much the entire chapter in a nutshell. Timing. This is probably why I don't really mind the difficulty of this chapter as much, even though it's a really hard chapter for the most part, but I really like levels that are based around timing for the most part. And that'll be it for Vexing Vortex. We've successfully vanquished the horrors. Okay, maybe not the horrors, because they were relatively tame horrors, even though that I've probably died over 150 times or something like that, but we will need the final countdown. Okay, there's been absolutely nothing easy about this, but that's okay, because the chapter was still pretty fun to play. All in all, it's a pretty nice chapter, and it's a good tribute to VVVVVV, which is also a really good game. Coming up next, it's back! Remnant's Dark World by Code 92.